such as unabridged birth certificates.
Joining me in studio is Mkuseli Apleni. He's the Director General for the Department of Home Affairs. Thanks so much for your time on ANN7 Prime. Why the need for these regulations that are being introduced?
Well, as we said in our statement, that we are implementing these regulations to make sure that children of South Africa and as well as the rest of the world are protected who want to come into South Africa or leave South Africa.
How much consultation did the Department of Home Affairs do with different stakeholders and interested parties before implementing these regulations?
Well, I think it is important for people to understand that a legislative process is not a responsibility of the Department of Home Affairs. We are to prepare a bill and we go through the cabinet, which has got various ministers of various sectors, and then thereafter we take that thing to Parliament. And then Parliament has got a responsibility because it's the representative of the people of South Africa to conduct public hearings, and then after that you put all those documents on a government gazette so that everyone who's got an interest can have an access and be consulted. So there is that consultation at that level which was done before the act was passed. Then thereafter, as a department, we have to draw the regulations themselves. Even those regulations, you need to publish them through a government gazette so that everyone has got an access, and there were public comments which we received and we considered them. Then after that, we did through the Minister of Home Affairs, who met with various stakeholders and consult, and then based on that, then there were certain things which we agreed to change, the other things which we were not able to change because of what was the purpose for us to make those changes in the first place.
How much training have people been given in order to deal with the new rules and regulations that are going to be implemented on the 1st of June?
You will recall that these regulations should have been implemented on the 26th of May 2014. Now is the 28th of May, is 1 year later. So we've been engaged in training and developing standard operating procedures and changing them here and there based on what the people have been advising us, and also on our side to make sure that we deal with any backlog which we have so that now people are able to get these documents in time by changing the systems.
For more discussion, I'm also joined via Skype by Craig Smith. He's an immigration attorney from Cape Town. Thanks for your time on ANN7 Prime. Your reaction to the new regulations?
Well, the Director General prepared the regulations for 6th of May last year. However, he does raise of a legislative process. The very cornerstone of law is causing traffic relation. It's not an act of Parliament.
Mr. Smith, perhaps I'll ask you to hold that thought. We're going to try and make sure that your sound is a little bit better, and then we can continue this three-way discussion that we'd like to have on these new regulations. Perhaps you can advise me what happens to people who travel after the 1st and they don't have an unabridged birth certificate for their child or any of the other things that are needed?
Well, firstly, this is the law of the country. You cannot travel if you do not have a passport. So then, if now you don't have an unabridged birth certificate, at your own choice, surely you won't be able to travel. However, if there is a parent who applied for an unabridged birth certificate, which our standard norm is that it must take between 6 and 8 weeks, and we are over that 8 weeks, we will be able as a department to issue a document which will be confirming who are the parents of this child, and then you'll be allowed to travel.
What happens to people who are coming into South Africa from outside, perhaps the United States, France, Do they also need to have an unabridged birth certificate, or is it a regulation for South Africans only?
Yes, yeah. Well, how we deal with the countries abroad is that, firstly, there are countries which are visa exempt. It means if you are visa exempt, you only need to have your passport to come to South Africa. There are countries which are not. Then those, they have to apply for a visa, and thereafter, then they come to South Africa. So if you are coming from a country where you need to have a visa, at the point of applying for that visa, you will be submitting your unabridged birth certificate. Therefore, you are not required to bring that unabridged birth certificate. Which those countries, some of them is like your China, which now people are going around and saying tourism will be affected because China numbers are dropping. But the question is, what is the effect of the unabridged birth certificate? Because in that instance, you are not required as a Chinese to come to South Africa with an unabridged birth certificate, because you have already submitted when you are applying for your visa. And the issue of visas have been implemented with China ever since. We have gone back to democracy as South Africa. They will always have to come up with a visa. Then if you are coming from a country which is not required for a visa, like your UK or USA, you need to bring an unabridged birth certificate, which anyway, it is the same. If a South African has to go to UK, he has to bring an unabridged birth certificate, but at the time of applying, because we are also not visa exempt in UK.
The reaction, and you've touched on it a little bit, but specifically from the tourism industry, has been quite negative towards these regulations and having to have your unabridged birth certificate as a child. Coming up with numbers saying South Africa lost 66,000 foreign tourists last year in May to December due to changes in immigration regulations, and saying that the total direct, indirect and induced impact on the South African economy was negative 2.6 billion and a loss of 5,800 jobs.
Well, we are getting at these comments from the tourism industry, but I have not yet get one on the basis, what are the comments of the parents whose children must be protected? Because no South African who have come to us as Home Affairs and say, it seems as if we are worrying too much, because in one of the interactions I had, people are saying, yes, there is a child trafficking, but it is not at alarming rate. Then for us as Home Affairs, one child kidnap is too many. But if we come to that, we are saying we show there will be an impact which is not only caused by the unabridged birth certificate. That's why we are not understanding when people are quoting countries like India, like China, like Russia, because those countries, they don't need an unabridged birth certificate to come to South Africa. So where is the impact? At the same time, we've done the study to look at how other countries are doing. All the countries have got an unabridged birth certificate. Malawi, South Africa, Botswana, all the countries in the world, they showed us a specimen. We have not yet come across any country which says, I do not have an unabridged birth certificate. But when people are traveling to US, they are traveling to UK, they do produce unabridged birth certificate when they are applying for those visas. So why now it becomes a problem now? Because it's South Africa.
Why do you think it is a problem?
Well, what I think is because it's of a problem that people have got various interests, which I think is important for us to protect this country. We do not want to be a hive of criminals at the same time. But South Africa, there was an article by one of the studies to say we have improved our level of tourism in the country, because the more you improve your security, is then that people will come to your country. But if you get bombed, where are you going to get tourism if you are like that?
Okay. I'm going to bring Craig Smith, who's an immigration attorney, back into the discussion. Craig, thanks so much for your time on ANN7 Prime. Your reaction to these regulations?
Well, I've never really been a big fan of the regulations the 26th of May, and I want to comment on the Director General's comment about China and unabridged birth certificates and the drop in tourism. The drop in tourism actually relates to the new regulations which require Chinese people to go in person to either Shanghai or Beijing, which could be 1,000 kilometers away, and apply for a visa. That is a principal issue of the drop in Asian tourism. I just want to go back into comment on a couple of points. Consultation. The Director General raised Act of Parliament and the parliamentary process. This has nothing to do with that. This pertains to Regulation 612 of the regulation, which allows the Minister to promulgate regulations after stakeholder intervention. As far as I'm concerned, the Immigration Advisory Board has been defunct for over a year, and I don't therefore understand what consultation would have come the way of the Immigration Advisory Board and stakeholder intervention. So I am concerned whether the department has done its homework in terms of the cost of tourism versus the one person that may be subject to a child kidnapping. We are not a country that is flagged as a high-risk trafficking country, and this was reported in the U.S. in their 2013 report on child trafficking. And notwithstanding that, our requirements for the birth certificates now are the most onerous anywhere in the world, based on other comparisons with the U.S., with Canada, with Brazil, and Australia. So I do think we are missing a trick here, and I think that there should be a lot of importance and significance attached to what the tourism industry is saying, because the Immigration Act wants to encourage foreigners to come to South Africa, spend their money and contribute towards our economy. And I think our immigration laws are becoming more and more restrictive, which is a bit of a turn-off for the foreigners. And the reality is the proof will be in the pudding over the next couple of years if nothing is done.
Craig, you're speaking about foreigners and how perhaps tighter and stricter regulations are making it off-putting for them. How do we balance that with the need for a safer South Africa which is off-putting to people who perhaps have criminal intentions to come here?
Absolutely. It would then be incumbent on the department to demonstrate the research, to show what the minutes were in the Immigration Advisory Board meetings. This board is so critical to informing regulation and policy making. Now, if the Minister or the Director General was able to demonstrate scientifically that we have lost track in terms of human trafficking, and we are now a Tier 3 country, synonymous with the Chinese and a few other countries, Uzbekistan, Libya, North Korea, if we suddenly had relegated ourselves, by all means, the Minister or the Director General could stand up and say, we have scientific evidence that we are losing track. But to argue the point, we have one child kidnapping is too many, but an absolute breakdown of the tourism industry and a negative sentiment towards foreigners who see our immigration laws as restrictive, I don't think that's in our best interest of our country. And I think that's contrary to what the immigration laws want to achieve.
Thank you very much. Kuseni Apleni, Director General for the Department of Home Affairs, joining me in studio. And via Skype, Craig Smith, who is an immigration attorney. Now, imams in mosques across South Africa delivered a national unified sermon regarding the Islamic militant group, state in Iraq and Syria, ISIS. This Islamist militant group that has seen